Here's what's coming up on the Cold Popcast.
It is a sort of disease when you consider yourself some kind of God, but I feel comfortable about it now since I began to live it out.
It either gets basically lumped into this idea of like, you know, is he like evil or something like that? Because I think it seems like he just had a very sophisticated understanding about human psychology and utilized that. What's poppin', everybody?
Welcome back to the Cold Popcast.
I'm Zoe.
And I'm Steve.
And today we're going to be talking about George Soros. Is he a humanitarian or is he an evil scientist?
Well, at the very least, he's not a scientist.
Okay.
Evil, let's leave that one in the air.
We got about 33% of that question figured out. Not a scientist.
So really the purpose of this episode is just to figure out like who George Soros is, kind of a little bit about his history, his background, and what kind of influence he has on the current Western world, I guess. So just to start, George Soros was born in 1930. That makes him about 93 years old.
Wow. Older guy.
Yeah, so he's really old and really rich. So he's got a lot going on.
Sounds like he might even have the secret immortality. He's living a long time.
Yeah, he's got the fountain of youth somewhere. He's just got it hidden in his property. He's made around $80 billion in his entire lifetime.
Wow.
Yeah, and he actually has a nonprofit organization where he's donated about $30 billion to it over the past 50 years.
Imagine the tax break this guy must get.
Yeah. So this guy gets money. He makes more money than some governments have made.
Does he rank up there with like the top richest men in the world, or is it, you know, his isn't is it like he's made that over time, but he doesn't just have 80 billion?
Yeah, he's made that over time.
Okay.
He doesn't have 80 billion liquid. He has probably like 10 or 20.
Okay.
So he's still up there in terms of like
huge.
rich. Like he's making more money than we'll probably ever make. But you know, maybe the show will blow up and we'll get.
Hey, well, hey, don't count yourself out, man. We're gonna get there.
Yeah. So let's get back.
Bring us to the top.
So basically, people actually question his character a lot. He has been behind a lot of different social movements like Black Lives Matter. They say he funded a lot of things. They say he funded like Antifa. There's basically like a lot of political movements or social movements that they say George Soros had some part that he played in it. Sometimes it's conspiracy, but sometimes it's actually like verifiably true. So you guys can kind of decide like how you feel about that, but we're just going to give you guys the facts about what we know about his history and what he's doing today. So just a little bit more about like kind of who he is. There's this clip. Go to the beginning of this video. Actually, just start it from zero.
I want to read you an article from LA Times. It says October of 2004. The title of the article is George Soros, the God who carries around some dangerous demons. Here's what he says in the interview. He says, I fancied myself as some kind of God. If truth be known, I carried some rather potent messianic fantasies with me from childhood, which I felt I had to control. Otherwise, they might get me in trouble. It is a sort of disease when you consider yourself some kind of God, the creator of everything. Are you ready? Here's how he finishes it. But I feel comfortable about it now since I began to live it out. Today, we're going to learn more about George Soros.
All right. Yeah. So
that's crazy.
With that being said, it's like, I'm going to drop, like, if we were playing Connect 4, I would drop a token or whatever on the side of maybe he's an evil scientist.
Yeah. Because
that's one point.
I mean, that's literally the mindset of like a person that wants to rule the world.
Yeah.
So
he basically, he was saying like at first he questioned that he was God, but now he's embraced it.
Yeah. Not only that, but now he feels like he's living it out, which, it's a very ominous statement because I'm just like, well, how? What are you doing?
Yeah. Like, what are you doing?
Yes.
What kind of impact are you trying to have if you really believe you're God?
Yeah, you rich globalist. What are you doing? That's essentially what he's talking about.
Yeah, so George Soros is what literally can be described as a globalist, but that pretty much just means he doesn't believe in borders. He thinks that the world should be a whole nation. Mm-hmm. Like, the whole world should be one country, effectively.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel differently about that. Some people are nationalists where they prefer like a nation versus the global sort of population.
What are some of the policies that he's it's confirmed that he favors that leans towards like this globalization ideology that he has?
I know that he like he favors open borders. He favors like
unified currency,
digital currencies, or not digital, like a digital currency.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, like digital currencies are like the first step towards having like a unified currency. And then he also promotes things like diversity, equity, and inclusion. So not to say that diversity and equity and inclusion are technically bad things, but
but it's just kind of like a factor of globalization. Like naturally, if you're leaning towards open borders, that's going to be like a priority of like getting people to assimilate mentally to like the new structure.
Right. Like we need to have the ability to say like, okay, this person has nothing to do with our culture.
Mm-hmm.
They probably don't even understand your business, but you better hire them.
Yeah, we need them in there.
Like you have to offer them a job. All right, so now I have another little point that this is another thing. Like I just want you guys to continue building your argument. Maybe this makes you feel good about them. Maybe it makes you feel bad about them. Let's see the next video.
Yeah.
Understanding is that you went out with this protector of yours who swore that you were his adopted godson.
Yes.
Went out, in fact, and helped in the confiscation of property from the Jews.
That's right. Yes.
I mean, that sounds like an experience that would send lots of people to the psychiatric couch for many, many years. Was it difficult?
Not at all. Not at all.
So a lot of people who didn't know.
So it's like the little evil smile.
Yeah, he has a little evil. Like first he pauses and thinks about it.
Yeah.
And then he has like a little evil like
a little grin that just starts to form.
He has like himself a little evil smile. Then he says, "No, not at all."
Yeah. Now what's interesting is he's Jewish, right?
He is a Jewish guy. Yeah.
Okay.
And this is in Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
Nazi Hungary. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, because that was the thing. Because it's like basically with the confiscation of like because basically he was kind of working. Was he working with the Nazis, or was he just doing something that just directly correlated to like the Jewish disenfranchisement at the time?
So no, he was a Jew, but then his family changed their name and then pretended to be Christians.
Oh.
Yeah, so he was actually like hired by this guy who said he was like his godfather, and then this guy had him basically collecting property from Jewish people during World War II.
Okay, so it was kind of like he was kind of operating undercover, like survival mode, essentially, because he had to, maintain this identity so that he wouldn't be persecuted.
Yeah.
But now they ask him like retroactively, like, well, now knowing all this information and having your identity, like, does it affect you any way today? And he's just like, no.
Yeah, no, he's just like,
not at all.
I didn't care at all. It was actually kind of fun.
That's crazy. The way he could disconnect himself. I don't know what that means, but that's just kind of what he said.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So he actually ended up moving to London later on, escaped the Nazis and all that good stuff. And he met this guy named Karl Popper. So Karl Popper was a philosopher of science who became Soros's mentor. He had a couple of different theories. In order for basically one of his theories was that in order for something to be false, to be considered scientific, it had to be falsifiable. So that meant that basically the purpose of this was to distinguish between things that were scientific and things that were not scientific. So basically his idea, this Karl Popper guy, he says that something is scientific if you can prove that it is also falsifiable. Now that doesn't mean that something is scientific if you can prove that it's not true. It just requires that you're able to come up with a secondary theory to why something is. If there is no secondary theory, then it is not falsifiable. So therefore it is not scientific.
Yeah. But then it's kind of like, I feel like with that, you run into like a strange territory of like really having ability to define something that's like as close to accurate, but because you can't prove disprove an alternative. It's like if I said like, the theory of gravity, it's like there's enough evidence to support gravity a lot, but then if I propose the idea like, well, what if it's not gravity? What if it's just a bunch of invisible hands like pulling everything down? Right. that could falsify because like, well, you can't necessarily disprove that other one.
Right.
Which, I'm like, I feel like that adds a layer of complication to a lot of science that you could more or less infer at a point, but you kind of take that ability away with that being like, well, it's not scientific because I could propose something else that's like, very hard to disprove essentially.
Right. I don't know. I mean, I would assume it has to be slightly realistic. Trinity, you have something to say?
It kind of reminds me of the, rock, paper, scissors, finger gun type thing.
Right.
Literally, if you could just come up with something, then
You just throw another element in there. It's like, well, now beat this too. It's like
I don't think his mic on.
I don't think so either. I didn't hear it.
Yeah. I think there's got to be. Hold on, wait. Okay, I'll cut this. click the button on Trinity's mic or turn the knob all the way up. It's mic 6. That's mic 6. Is there?
It's
6?
already up.
Oh well, fuck it. Hiram's not here. I don't know how to fix it. Sorry, Trinity.
Move over to the other one over there.
Oh yeah,
That
just
one's
do
on.
that. Yeah, just move to the other one.
You gotta,
but you're off
not
camera.
on the camera. You gotta turn the camera.
Mayday.
Oh yeah. Just take
Yeah,
the
you
mic.
just take it off and ring with him. All right.
This is hectic.
Yeah.
All right. Do I just cut back in? Where
Yeah, we'll just
Yeah,
throw
just-
we'll just throw it in, like we'll just cut here
Yeah.
and put your answer into this.
So
Say what you just
Trinity-
said before.
So it kind of just remind me of the rock, paper, scissors, finger gun thing, where like if you could just come up with something better or different, then it automatically negates the first thing.
Yeah. Then I have to like basically tell you how the finger gun it doesn't exist or why it's actually not effective against rock.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that becomes a scientific theory. It's like that falsifiableness of it. Like, hey, finger gun, not gonna work, right? Because that's just your hand, and I can break it with a rock.
That's right.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Do you think that it would?
But you know, and then it's
Yeah. Do you think it's a little off topic, but do you think that inspire like too much competition in the scientific community where people are just going to be like essentially presenting alternatives just to disprove someone rather than to prove like an actual thing?
Well, the objective of it isn't actually to prove any type of theory. The objective of it is actually to prove whether something is scientific or non-scientific. So it's like you could say, I have a soul, right? Can you scientifically prove that you don't or that you do? You can't.
Yeah.
You can say you have a soul, but there's no real way. There's no like way to say like, oh, well, that's not your soul doing it. That's something else doing it, I guess.
Okay, so it's
Yeah.
just like a barometer or a measuring of how scientific something is, essentially.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Yeah. So that's like the core of George Soros' beliefs. That's like one of the main theories that his whole process thrives off of.
Mhm.
And he said this himself. So this isn't like just me making stuff up. This is some things. These are some things that he actually said. So and then one of the other theories that he had was that history unfolds under predictable laws and patterns, and those patterns actually influence world history. So like the way that world history unfolds is based on specific patterns, right? It's not like, oh, well, things just are all random and things just happen. There's actual patterns to how history unfolds usually. Like history repeats itself. That's what.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, if that's the case, then it's kind of like it almost makes time and things seem very predetermined, because if humans operate off patterns, eventually you can essentially predict what's coming next.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So this Popper guy, he promoted freedom, democratic governance, flexible changing economic structures, and he believed that all knowledge is tentative and subject to revision in light of new information. So that's where that idea of like falsifiability comes into question, right?
Mm-hmm.
This guy basically believes that if you get new quote unquote evidence, then the truth can change.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's saying. So let's actually see this next clip and get a little bit more about what he was thinking at that time.
Cool.
In regimes such as communism and fascism, it was about replacing it with individual freedom, democratic governance, and a flexible, changing social and economic structure. This is what he wanted to do. Number 2, fallibilism, the belief that all knowledge is tentative, provisional, and subject to revision in light of new evidence. This influenced Soros' investment strategy, and he always talks about the fact that he was ready to adjust his positions if the facts changed. Number 3 is critical thinking. So Soros adopted this in his investment strategy, where he was often willing to go against conventional wisdom, but also in his philanthropic activities, encouraging open debate and discussion. And last but not least, humanitarian efforts. This has significantly influenced Soros' philanthropic efforts, which has focused on civil society, education, and human rights around the globe. Or at least that's what he claims to focus on. So while he
Yeah, so those are basically all the things that he sort of focuses on in his main efforts, like in the world, like in changing things and being a person that moves the world forward, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
At least, like the guy just said, I mean, that's what he says that he prioritizes, but that sort of like, now I'm almost on the other side a little bit, like where it's like, is he a bad guy? Because he's focusing on like critical thinking, debate, things that I believe actually would improve the world. So like, if you go off of what he's actually saying, then he actually sounds a little bit like a good guy, Yeah.
So, I mean, it seems like he has an interest in like global progress and like progressive ideas, where it's like, human unity, a world where businesses kind of collaborate and stuff like that. He wants to seems like he wants to drive the world in a certain direction of progress, essentially.
Right.
Which isn't a bad thing. I think the part where it kind of gets either conscrewed or it either gets basically lumped into this idea of like, is he like evil or something like that? Because a lot of the foundation of what he wants to drive that movement is deeply entrenched in an idea of control and centralization.
Yeah, manipulation.
And then didn't he say something about like not having, pretty much he doesn't agree with like a democratic society.
Yeah.
Because it how'd you say it?
Well, because a democratic society is self-correcting,
Right.
basically. Like he thinks that a society should be corrected by the people running the society rather than it being self-correcting. Like
Right.
like economics, basically. Like
Mhm.
the market will correct itself once. I don't really know how that whole theory works, but
Yeah.
people say the market will correct itself, and I believe that it's something like, people won't. If people don't have money, they won't be able to spend money, so the market's eventually going to have to correct itself.
Right. I think that kind of is driven by the idea like how the free market works. Like once there's a need for something,
Right.
that something's going to come along to correct that need, like naturally. If it's going to continue, this needs to change. Therefore, something will manifest in society to change it. But his ideology is kind of against that, where he's like, well, things would be more efficient and run more correctly if you had like a centralized power
Right.
that can make these changes without there having to be like, and I think with that, there's like an idea where you wouldn't even have to have a problem occur for correction if you have someone driving the ship.
Right.
And I think the only thing that kind of comes off as evil or controlling is just because it essentially combats the idea of like, public freedom in terms of discourse and, people kind of choosing their own destiny. His is more aligned with, we establish an idea and someone is in control of like getting to that, whether people agree or disagree with it or not. Like, whether it's contention or not, there's like the market is controlled by something centralized, I think is his idea.
Yeah, and I agree with that too. I think that's pretty much what he's going for.
Mhm.
And when you put the backdrop of him believing that he's God,
Yeah, like when you say, like I said, you take that idea and you put it to someone who literally said, like, I feel like I'm God, like that, that could come off a little bit like, evil, mad,
Like
scientist.
Kanye.
I want to rule the world type,
yeah, like a Yeezus type.
Yeah, there you go. I feel like if Yeezy had like an IQ, like he's probably smart artistically, but if he had like let's say he had an IQ for robotics of like 200, he probably would turn into like a mad scientist.
Right. He probably would have came up with the Neuralink before Elon Musk.
Yeah, I feel like Kanye has like Kanye has the exact psychology of someone who's either gonna be like a really great creative or like the next genocide, like person who does that. Yeah, he's gonna create massive change. It just how he grows up is gonna depend on which direction he goes.
Right. Yeah. He can't be in Nazi Germany. I know that.
Yeah, no.
Those things are gonna turn really bad. So yeah, George Soros, if you guys didn't know, he was actually one of the best money managers between 1970 and 2000. He was able to get like an average rate of return of 30%, which is actually enormous. So when people invested their money with him, they got basically a 30% return on all of their investments.
And that's average. So it's like usually, you're talking about
could
more
have
than
been more.
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
could have been way more. Could have been somewhat less, but on average 30%.
That's good.
Now, when you look at like think about a savings account, the return is literally like 0.5%.
Right.
So a 30% return is huge. Now let's actually see one of the other theories, because these two theories actually build into the next topic I wanted to talk about.
Let's look at both. Number one, the theory of fallibility as a concept stemmed from the philosophical understanding that it's impossible to achieve perfect knowledge. In other words, humans are inherently flawed in their understanding and judgment. The theory is mainly used to explain the limitations of human comprehension and decision-making in complex systems like economics. This fallibility is often magnified by cognitive biases, incomplete information, and the emotions of the individual. And the second theory was the theory of reflexivity. And here's what reflexivity is. It's the idea that people's perception and beliefs influence their decision-making, which in turn impacts the state of the world, changing the fundamentals that they are trying to understand. This then further alters their perceptions and beliefs, creating a continuous reflexive feedback loop. He openly talks about how he used some of these philosophies to actually manipulate the markets in his favor and make billions of dollars. We'll look at a couple of times he did this, but he said this once in his book. This is what makes propaganda so effective, because the complexity of the world we live in exceeds our ability to understand it. Confronted by a reality of extreme complexity, we are obligated to resort to various methods of simplification. Pretty wild.
All right, you can pause.
Sharp.
So basically,
quote.
yeah. So basically, like, humans reflexively have to simplify things in order to understand them. Right? Yeah. Because our knowledge is so limited, we can't understand everything. So we simplify them, and that's why propaganda works so well. But knowing that, he used those theories to make billions of dollars by kind of predicting how markets would actually act, which is genius. You know, I can't say it's not a genius thing to do.
Oh, it's smart.
But when you start applying that to like social movements and people and things, then it might get a little bit more iffy.
Yeah, that's where you run into like the idea of like propaganda, essentially. Like that's how propaganda gets spread. Because I think it seems like he just had a very sophisticated understanding about human psychology and utilized that in order to further his own ideas and regime, kind of make more money. So it's like understanding how people react to certain like how people react to information in the market. You can essentially scope a message, package it in a way that is very like simplified and, either use that to like sway a narrative or to sell something to people and that, is more digestible.
Right. And with that knowledge, he could actually do it more efficiently too. So he can actually achieve more while spending less money.
Yeah.
Right. So he might not have as much money as like Bill and Melinda Gates or something like that, but he has more probable not like, Ben Gates is more of a scientist type, like a nerd type almost.
Yeah.
While George Soros is more like a.
You say Ben Gates?
Did I say Ben Gates?
You said Ben Gates. I'm like, hey, who's Ben?
Yeah, Bill Gates. Whatever.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, Bill
He's
Gates.
got that much money?
Yeah. Bill Gates is more. I think Bill Gates is worth like $80 million or something like that.
80 billion, I think.
80 billion.
Yeah.
I think he's worth like 80
Bill
billion.
Gates.
Yeah. But George Soros is worth maybe 10 or 20, but he spends a lot of money on like progressive campaigns. So like, for example, he put $27 million into the campaigns to beat George Bush.
Yeah.
Of course he lost, but just understanding that, you can have that much of an influence against a political candidate, especially one running for president. It's like, if he uses that idea of like reflexivity, where he like makes a simplified campaign, like maybe, who knows, maybe he actually donated to who's the guy that was a Man Bear Pig on South Park?
Al Gore.
Al Gore.
Yeah.
Maybe he had donated to Al Gore and actually helped him with that whole like, going green type, nonsense at that time. Like it was pretty nonsensical at that time.
No, I'm just laughing because it's like you're trying to figure out how to remember Al Gore. Like Man Bear Pig. I think the funny part is that I was like, oh, obviously Al Gore.
Yeah, Al Gore, of course, exactly. The guy that ran for president and was Man Bear Pig.
Yeah,
fought Man Bear Pig on South Park.
Yep.
And then also, so he's donated $50 million a year in the past couple years to influence colleges. So basically, like, he's using his money as like a means of gaining influence, which I guess anybody with money is going to do that.
Right.
But it's just like, what kind of influence is he trying to achieve?
True.
Yeah.
So,
Okay.
Sounds like he's playing chess.
Well, let me ask you guys, what do you think? Evil or humanitarian? Who's has positive ideas for the future?
Well, I would say, I mean, I always like the idea of you can be both at once. So it's like, maybe he's evil because he's manipulative, right? He's predicting the way people act, and taking that and leading them down a pathway that leads to whatever outcome he wants.
Yeah.
You could definitely see that as evil, but, doing humanitarian things kind of leans him to the good side. So it's like the mix of both. He's probably a mix of both, but he probably leans towards a certain thing. And I feel like his actions will probably reveal that.
I would say. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, my bad. I was just gonna say he sounds cocky to me. He's just like, you don't know you need this, and I'm just gonna use propaganda because obviously you're too dumb to take your medicine and understand. So we're just gonna trick you into knowing the truth, and basically. Like, he just thinks he's so smart that he can't even...
He thinks he's so cool.
Yeah, he just thinks he's so smart he can't even, like, warn people that there's danger coming. He just has to trick you into, that type of stuff. Like,
yeah, I can see him having the mentality of, like, I know what's best for mankind, So,
if you vaguely describe him, he kind of, like, he sounds very familiar. Let's just say that.
What if you actually had a child that was going to a school where that the guy who is basically funding a lot of the programs at the school is pretty much has a god complex, and like you don't know what he wants your kid to think, but would that be like a deal breaker for you for that school? Or would you be happy for your kid to just go to that school?
No, not necessarily.
I probably would just be happy for him to go to school. I wouldn't think too much because, I mean, at that level, I mean, he probably has influence over a couple schools, so it's just kind of like that's kind of like something operating at a level that I couldn't really affect. So it's like, all I know, I have to send my kid to a good school. Is this a good school? So I would just kind of like
just
do
be a
that.
good school. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyone else got any closing thoughts on this one?
Yeah. I guess my last thing at least would be, I think he's just, I think good and evil is very subjective in nature to an extent, and I think he's just a guy that's got his own ideas of how to like get where he wants to be, and he just happens to have gathered, or gained the power to kind of like drive that. So he's just kind of like, I think he's just motivated by his own self-interest to an extent, and he has this idea of how he wants the world to run, and he's one of those lucky people that has the ability to, make a substantial change towards that direction than most people would.
Right.
I feel like any person that had the amount of influence he's gathered would, to some extent, exhibit qualities of like manipulation or, would in some way, want to exert that influence towards their own narrative. So I don't think it's anything out the realm of what a person would do.
Yeah. And earlier I wanted to even say like, well, is he good? Is he evil? Or is he just human? Because like most humans are probably most humans are probably going to end up trying to like exert their influence if they had that kind of power. Like if they had the ability to do so, they're going to think like, well, obviously not most humans are going to be like, oh, I'm God, but most humans are going to say, hey, if I have the power to affect change in the world, then I'm going to do it.
Right.
If the change is positive or negative, that depends on the person. But overall, I think George Soros probably isn't like completely evil. He probably has good intentions. But he also is probably very controlling, and trying to just influence things in a direct way.
Like Thanos.
Yeah,
like Thanos.
Yeah, Thanos I'd say he's like a Thanos.
Yeah, Thanos wasn't a bad guy. He had good plans for the universe. It just so happens that a couple people had to die. But I mean, come on.
Yeah. So basically, that's the whole episode, guys. Thanks for watching, man. This podcast is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Rumble, all platforms where video is available. And you can actually find us on Patreon too for $5 a month. You get the entire catalog of My Black Friends podcast. That's a show that we still do that was very funny. It is a comedy-based show, about hour-long episodes with nonstop laughter. So make sure you check it out.
Trinity, go ahead and end us off with a nice bite.
Bruh. All right, thanks for watching. Let's pop out of here.